don't know what I did. So I'm gonna bring this over. I'm gonna really need your help, like seam ripping it. She was like, all right.
This was after you threatened to just put it in the garbage.
I literally was like, I'm going to dump it in the trash and light it on fire because why? Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today's episode, we are talking about our scariest or craziest project we've ever done. Crazy. So, do you want to start with yours?
I can start. I was giving this some thought beforehand. I think the scariest quilt project, just because I was not trusting the process, was when we all did jelly roll races.
Yeah.
Which is where you take a jelly roll, which is 2.5 by
40 with the fabric, and you sew them all together end to end, so you end up with like a 3-mile long strip of fabric. It ends up being like 1,600 something inches.
Yes. It's just huge.
Yeah.
And the first time I did it, we were all doing it at the same time. We call it our besties quilt, which is one of my favorites still, but
mine too.
We were all working on them at the same time, and Beth and Jen were just like going through it, and all their strips were on the same line and all together, very organized. And mine was just a disaster because I hadn't figured out how to keep them all in the same line of thread. So I would sew the two pieces together, cut the thread, sew the two pieces together, cut the thread. So I ended up with like just a legit knot of fabric, just the most untangleable knot. So after you have your 3 miles of fabric, you fold it in half, and then you just sew along the long edge until you hit the end.
And then you snip it.
Yes, which is great in theory if your jelly roll isn't just in a giant knot.
If you know what you're doing.
So I did not trust the process. About halfway through sewing that first long edge together, my fabric was so twisted and knotted up that I just I couldn't do it. So we had to like pull it all apart, find the end and snip it before I was even close to it, and just like hope and pray that somehow it would work out. So that was just a not trusting the process. I mean, every time you fold it in half, it gets shorter and shorter and easier to sew, and it's actually a really easy quilt to put together if you get past that first 3-mile strip of fabric.
Yeah.
But I just remember being halfway and being like, this is not going to work out. There's no way. But I've made a lot since then, and I've learned how to keep them all together and keep them straight and not just tie them into a knot. So I think that was just one of the scariest at the moment. Yeah. But then it ended up not being that scary, which is how they always work out.
I honestly, I was gonna say mine too, because my besties quilt, like, I watched the tutorial video that we were following so many times because I was like, I'm going to just like figure this out. I'm going to try to understand it because I wanted to like do a good job. And so I'm like watching the video. I'm like, okay, I got this. And so I go home, I get it all set up. I get my 50 million strips like lined up, ready to sew. And I start sewing and I'm like, yeah, I got them all sewed together. I was like so proud of myself. I did chain piece them because the girls, Jen and Beth, showed us how, and then I was like, okay, I'm not gonna cut every piece apart. Well, idiot me, like, I swear to you, in that video she shows you, like, instead of, putting the fabric together and sewing across, I swear to you she sewed down the middle. And that's what I did to every single one of my pieces. And I got like all the way through and I was like, what the hell is this? And so I called Beth and I was like, listen, I don't know what I did, so I'm gonna bring this over. I'm gonna really need your help, like seam ripping it. She was like, all right.
This was after you threatened to just put it in the garbage.
I literally was like, I'm going to dump it in the trash and light it on fire because why? And she was like, just bring it over. I'll seam rip it. It's fine. We'll seam rip it. Yeah. We'll fix it. And
because no matter where you are in your quilting journey, seam ripping is still the worst.
Seriously.
The worst thing to do.
Every time I'm like, why? So we got everything seam ripped, and then she showed me like, no, you laid across in this, and I was like, maybe I was like overthinking it and watched the video too many times, and then like I don't know. I still haven't gone back to like verify that I'm wrong, because I mean, why would I do that? But
I also love your commitment to sewing all like 52 pieces together before you checked.
I was just so confident that I did it right, because I had watched the videos so many times. I swear, I think I watched it like 7 times in a row just to like watch, and I was like watching her very closely. Nothing against Jenny Doan, because I mean, she's a god among quilters, but it was like such a mess. And then yeah, just like having to lay out the fabric, like all the strips, the 3 miles of strips sewn together. It was just a mess. And it's crazy too, because even though we all made the same exact quilt, it looks completely different.
Yeah, that is the great thing about jelly races. Yeah, they always turn out different.
Yeah,
and I think the best part about them is, aside from making sure you don't get them in a knot, you don't have to think about the layout at all, because you just sew them together and then you fold it in half, and you just keep doing that.
Yeah, and I think the scariest part was like, well, not only the 6 hours of seam. No, it wasn't 6 hours. That's a really big exaggeration. The like 1 hour of seam ripping, only because Beth helped me.
Yeah.
Was like getting it all laid out flat, and then when you initially fold it together, making sure there's no twists in it, and just like ensuring that it's just like all the same direction.
Yeah. Or just do what I did and throw it together and cut it and hope that it works.
Yeah. I mean, there's ways to do things, and then there's ways to do things, you know? I think that was terrifying, but yeah, that was definitely like my first, besides like my first quilt making me want to cry and run to the hills and never look at a sewing machine ever again, that one was like really scary at first, just because it was different. And like, I mean, was that like the 3rd quilt I'd ever made? So
yeah, I think speaking of seam ripping, there's been times where we all have put together an entire quilt top and then just seam ripped it all apart because we didn't like how it was turning out, and then we've made different quilts with that same fabric, and it's been great. So yeah, seam ripping sucks. Sometimes it's necessary.
Yeah, that's a scary thing too, especially like for me, because I want to like do it and then be done with it. I don't want to have to go back to it, so that is always terrifying. Like, what if I have to seam rip it? I'm like, yeah, come on, self, it's fine. Yeah, like it ends up really not being that bad. Yeah, like looking back and reflecting, I'm like, oh, I was just being a really big baby. But
it gets easier over time. I think there's also a lot of patterns that seem really scary and hard at first, but then once you start doing them, they're not that hard. I think one that I was really nervous about recently I did was the Fresh as a Daisy quilt pattern, which turned out amazing.
It really did.
But
gorgeous.
It was hard. It was a lot of work. That was one of the more complicated patterns I've done. I was doing it for a good friend who was just going through a rough time, so I wanted to make sure it was like beautiful and perfect and exactly what she wanted, and would just like make her year. So there was a lot of pressure. It was a difficult pattern. I was really nervous about it, but then I got into it, and it's just like any other quilt, just one step at a time, one piece at a time, one block at a time, and it all comes together. Yeah. And it's never as scary as it seems.
No, it turned out so pretty. I had that kit I made with my, the one and only time I've made the quilt, that, like, I got, what are they called? The fat quarter boosters. And then it would come with, like 12 fat quarters, and then, a pattern, and then a matching, thread. And I made one for a friend, again, a good friend. But it's the first time I've like veered away from just like doing square blocks of like half square triangles and like herringbone, starburst, like anything with half square triangles. And I was terrified at first because I had never snowballed a corner. And I was like, I don't even know what this means. I don't understand these directions. I can't do this because I'm an idiot. I can't read. I don't know what's happening. I'm blind all of a sudden. Like, I just started coming up with like all these excuses for why I couldn't do this quilt. But once, was it you, or I think it was you? You were like, you literally just put it on there.
Oh yeah.
You sew the corner, you cut it.
I love a snowball.
And I was like, so it's not hard. You were like, no. I was like, cool. And then it turned out just fine. But like, I was terrified of that pattern at first because I was like, I don't even know how to do any of this.
Yeah.
And all the cuts and like, because when you do something like that, you have to make all these like really tiny pieces that, you know, when you're snowballing a corner, you're just sewing the corner of the fabric. So it's like, I hate cutting fabric.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But it turned out beautiful and she loves it. And so that's really all that matters.
Yeah.
And it really, like, I could do that pattern again so easily now because I just faced my fear of looking stupid, I guess. But
yeah, that's reminding me of a quilt I made. It's the Down Memory Lane quilt. It's a bunch of hearts and you have to snowball a million corners on every heart. And cutting fabric is the worst part. And I am an idiot and read the pattern wrong. And I cut about 1,000 squares. And I only needed like 200.
I forgot. You were like, so I have approximately 1,000 tiny white squares.
A gallon Ziploc bag full of those little tiny squares.
Are they like 2 inches?
They're 1-inch squares. They're like 1 or 1.5 inch squares. They're not easily transferable to any other project, but like, I don't know. Yeah, quilt math is like a whole different category.
We call it quilt math for a reason because it is the scariest part besides like cutting, like doing the math to make sure you have enough fabric that you can make the cuts you need to cut, and then cutting the fabric. Like in order, those are the 2 scariest parts of quilting. But like, oh man.
In general, always cut less because you can always cut more. But if you're like me and you cut 1,000 1-inch squares, you can't really put that fabric back together. So always cut less.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can cut more.
You can, it's like you can always get more fabric and cut more. Yeah. But you can't ever undo the cuts, which is like, you know, that old adage, measure twice and cut once. It's measure like 1,000,000 times and then cut. Preferably 1,000,000 before you slice anything because, it's like, ugh. And then when you like, the ruler moves and you slide off to the side and you're like, I swear to God.
Yes, which is a new ruler now. That don't slide and they're a lifesaver. Oh yeah. I use it on everything, and if I try to use my other ruler now, I'm like, it's like I'm skiing on the fabric.
It's like an eel. It just slides everywhere. Yeah, that like cutting fabric can be super intimidating and like make things seem so hard. But
I think you also just have to find the process that works for you, because I definitely don't cut fabric the way that Jen taught us to cut fabric or the way that anyone cuts fabric. Yeah. But it works out, and if it's off a little bit, it's always fine. I mean, strive for perfection, but...
Right. Like, but those, if it's like a hairline little mistake, like it's not gonna... It's not gonna like ruin the whole thing. Like you can find ways to like make it work, and so I think it's just over time. But there's still so many patterns that I'm like, oh, that's so cute, but I quick think to myself like I could never make that, and then I'm like, I mean, I could. Like,
yeah, I think that too. There's a lot of, the one that I haven't tried yet is a curved patterns, which are so beautiful and amazing, but I cannot wrap my mind around how like 2 opposing curves are supposed to sew together.
I know.
I've watched videos. I don't get it. I haven't tried it yet.
Me either.
I want to. I'm intimidated.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think was really intimidating at first was paper piecing.
Yeah,
I still have 2 full quilts that are 100% paper piecing that I've had for years. That I'm just like, one day I should start those.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever made anything paper pieced.
Yeah.
Still. I'm like, that's cute. You guys did a great job. Because, yeah, anything that's tiny, like, I don't know why, but sewing small things makes me want to rip my hair out. like I said before, like, anything less than a 6-inch block, like, I don't want to touch it.
It's fair.
But,
yeah,
you know, I should branch out a little.
You should.
Nobody wants just, like, squares on their quilts all the time. I shouldn't say nobody. I do, but that's just me. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, they can seem so crazy, but yeah, if you just like take it little by little and just, you know, if you're not sure about something, look it up. I mean, that's really how I've gotten through so many things, or just, yeah, looking stuff up and watching videos and asking a friend or whatever. It's like, yeah, you just have to be willing to like look a little bit foolish to learn those things.
And embracing imperfections.
Yeah.
Because a lot of our patterns don't come out absolutely perfect, but I don't think anyone's do. I get on Instagram and I'm looking at professional quilters and I'm like, that corner doesn't line up perfectly.
Yeah.
So just knowing,
like, you're not
none
the
of us
only
are
one.
perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
It's still a beautiful quilt that no one's ever going to see that corner not line up.
Right. Like, they're not going to be hunting for mistakes. They're going to just look at the craftsmanship of it and like be grateful for the art of it. So
yeah,
it's pretty cool. But yeah, I think, I don't know. I don't know. The end.
And just, I think it's important to try new things and just, once you get started and just follow the pattern step by step, it comes together and it's never as hard. Even if there's tricky cutting measurements like 3 7/8, anytime I see that, I'm like, why? Why?
Yeah, exactly. But there's always a purpose to those things, and like you were saying, just trusting the process. And I think that comes with so many different things in life, but I just think like being okay that like I'm gonna make mistakes and it's fine, it's gonna be fine, everything's figure outable, everything's fixable, unless you cut fabric wrong. But you can always buy more fabric. Like, there's always a solution. So yeah, just really focusing on the process and yeah, just chunking it in little steps will make it so much easier in the long run. And then nothing's that scary.
Yep. And just finding tutorials, I think that's always so helpful. When quilt I made, I can't remember what it's called, but it's diamonds. So it's essentially half square triangles, but you use rectangles instead of squares.
I remember
and you
that
have to line it up differently.
Yeah.
And sew it together differently. And that quilt has some of the thickest seams on it. I remember when I was long arming it, your mom was like, are these seams okay?
You're like, I don't know. I just followed the pattern.
I mean, it's sewed together, so yeah.
They were really thick. I forgot about that. Because there was just so much coming together in one spot. But it's like... Well,
but it's always a learning opportunity, and now I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't made that pattern again, but it was a good learning opportunity about dealing with seams and how to iron. I will never iron seams open. I just will never do that. But just knowing how to iron them so that they lay as flat as possible. And don't all gather with 18 layers of fabric in one corner.
Yeah, there's just so many solutions to like the little things that you run into that seem scary at the time, but yeah, there's tutorials out there for everything. And you know, we'll have tutorials too eventually, because we have some stuff we want to share that we've learned that has made our lives so much easier. So that'll be a fun thing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you have a scary quilt that you've encountered or a crazy story, let us know in the comments, or you can DM us at our Instagrams.
Yeah.
But don't forget to like, subscribe, comment,
get in touch with us,
talk to us, ask us questions. We're here for you, and we would love to hear from you.
See you next time.
Bye.
Like being okay with making mistakes.
Yeah.
Is really important too.
Yeah. Yeah.
You might have said it, but
I think we definitely said it like 5 times.